Our gospel reading this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. And Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And so they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." And so they took it. And when the steward took and tasted the water that had become wine, he did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. The steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this. It was the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm going to begin today by stepping into dangerous territory and talk about something I know very little about: a mother's intuition. If you think about it, when you hear that phrase, a mother's intuition, it's ultimately neutral. The person who gave birth to you, the one who raised you, and I realize that can be one person or 2 different people as well. The one who you would call mother sees positive attributes in you, but she also knows your shortcomings, the places you've slipped up in the past, or even your personal vulnerabilities. For the most part, those negative attributes are rarely shared. Instead, the one that calls you mother holds those close to her heart. They are realizations about you as a person that are known and often accepted by the one who loves you. For the most part, most of us, I would venture that our mother's intuition favors the positive in us, sometimes to an embarrassing effect, especially if you are a child. Again, I don't claim to be an expert in what consists of a mother's intuition, yet it's something that we can be familiar with and something that we can relate to. Our gospel reading today centers on a local wedding in which Mary, the mother of Jesus, has been invited. Her son, Jesus, is there as well, along with his disciples. Imagine the conversation among family members as the guest list was talked about. Should we invite Mary? Yes, but if we invite her, we need to invite her son as well, don't we? And what about all those people that are following him around? Do we have to invite them too? Okay, let's see. Mary of Nazareth, +1. Jesus of Nazareth, +4 to 12. Good friends? Obviously, I'm joking. Wedding customs would naturally include family members, and there were expectations that would need to be followed. And when the writer states that the wedding was on the third day, he is linking what is to take place in Cana with a sequence of events that has happened in the first chapter of the gospel. So among the invited guests are Mary, her son Jesus, along with Andrew, Simon Peter, Philip, and Nathanael, who very recently had started to follow Jesus. Now, typically, a story, especially one talking about a wedding like this, might focus on the two getting married, the bride and the groom. But for the most part, they are barely mentioned in the story. At the end, the steward goes up to the bridegroom to tell him how good it was that he saved the good wine for later in the party, and who would do that? The miracle of water turning to wine is witnessed first and foremost by the servants, the disciples, and eventually us as readers of the gospel. In this era of supply distribution problems where hastily made signs convey unwelcome information, you might ask, why is it so problematic that the wine has run out in the first place? After all, the steward intimates that the guests have been enjoying good wine and they are ready to move on to the cheap wine. Apparently, some have already started to become a bit tipsy on the good wine. As we read the passage, we need to look at the cultural context. At the time, it was important for the family to have a sufficient supply of wine on hand for the invited guest, because we're not talking about an hour-long celebration, but rather, in the Jewish tradition, we are talking about a bride and groom that are celebrated not with a honeymoon, but a 7-day wedding feast at the home of the groom. I mentioned honeymoon. Our modern understanding of a honeymoon is a fairly recent invention. Honeymoons first became popular in Great Britain around the early 1800s, and the original intention of a honeymoon was for the bride and groom to go and visit family and friends that weren't able to come to the wedding. And certainly at best, only wealthy couples would be able to do that. Today, couples count down the minutes before heading out on the honeymoon as if they're ready to blast off from the planning, the gathering, the attention, and the bustle of the wedding day. Today's honeymoon is a time for a couple to be alone, to get to know each other a little more. That wasn't necessarily the case in Jesus' time. In Jesus' time, invited guests come to stay and they celebrate the beginning of the couple's new life together. It's a feast that lasts 7 days. People come to plan for a week of celebration, family gathering together, drinking together, offering their blessing upon this new family. In the story of the wedding today, the party hasn't even gotten off the ground when the wine runs out. In an era when hospitality was so important, this situation could have brought shame and disgrace upon not only the bride and the groom, but upon their families as well. When the wine ran out, the celebration would end and everyone might just go home. One writer said, "The situation constitutes a crisis for the family who shoulders the responsibility of hospitality." Now, those who realize the wine has run out are not in the center of the action, but they exist along the outside edges, the periphery of the story. The servants, they are the first to know that the wine is running low and it's run out. If you've ever driven friends or family somewhere and you waited too long to fill up your gas tank, you know what the servants are experiencing. Imagine being on a vacation in Arizona with your in-laws and a newborn baby, part of your family in the back seat. You drive down a desert road and you notice fewer and fewer places to pull off. In the driver's seat, you notice that needles start getting really close to empty, and you frantically search for gas stations. And soon a little yellow light starts flashing at you, and you say, "Why didn't I fill up earlier?" As time goes on, you wonder if you're going to make it to your destination. The servants have most likely been reaching deeper and deeper into the containers, noticing that they are putting way too much effort this early in the feast. As they begin to draw half ladles of wine, their eyes become panicked. Why didn't the family fill up earlier? As the hours tick on, they wonder if the party is going to end. The bride and the groom, and most likely the family as well, are just passengers in the car. They are for the moment unaware of the situation. It is those that are at the periphery, the servants in this case, who notice that something is amiss. As it so often does in gospel texts, the significant action is involving the kingdom of God. It occurs somewhere other than we expect. It's often at the margins, either geographically or sociologically, where our understanding first evolves and movement and change begins. Those on the edge of the story are the first to know about the situation, the unseen workers, taking in all those details. And soon Mary learns that the wine has run out as well. Pay attention to how the passage is actually laid out. At the very beginning of the chapter, we hear about the wedding and that the mother of Jesus was there. Mary is mentioned first, and then we hear that Jesus and his disciples are there. It's as though the writer is highlighting Mary's presence and the vital role that she is playing in the story. When the wine runs out, she says to Jesus, "They have no wine." He responds to her in not quite the way that we would expect. But this is where her mother's intuition comes in. Mary says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." That one sentence contains her expectation and her confidence in what Jesus can and will do. After all, this is Mary. Mary who interrogated an archangel, the one who listened to stories of shepherds and treasured all things in her heart, the one who heard the prophecy of Simeon and Anna as they presented Jesus in the temple, the one who opened her doors to visitors from the east, the Magi who told of stars and wonder, of prophecies and purpose. Mary, the one who witnessed her child debating with teachers in the temple. Her mother's intuition has been fueled by events and prepared her for such a time as this. She knows and she believes in her son, and perhaps her heart is racing just a bit as she wonders if this is the time. And she tells them, "They have no wine." And we respond, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me?" But instead of hearing his next comment, she believes in her heart of hearts, "Oh yes, my son, your hour is at hand." With expectation and confidence in her heart, she turns to those who are concerned about the moment and she says, "Do whatever he tells you to do." Jesus brings the celebration. Water is turned into wine. Jesus performs his first miracle, and he reveals his glory. And his disciples believed in him. Now, maybe that's a minor miracle in itself. These followers of Jesus, some of whom had just recently been following John around the desert, all of whom have just started to follow Jesus. They probably had been questioning themselves, or even better, their families and friends have asked, "What are you doing?" Here, sitting with Jesus in the beginning of his ministries, his disciples witness his first miracle. And the gospel says they believed in him. This first miracle of Jesus is extravagant. It's not just a little bit of wine, but so much wine that the celebration goes on. Our psalm for today reminds us of the abundance of God as well. The reading from Isaiah reminds us how God continues to hold promise before us and tell us of God's joining in the celebration. Jesus turns water into wine in the midst of the celebration, and he encourages the celebration to go on. It's fitting that Jesus begins his ministry surrounded by family and friends. Jesus celebrated with people. He celebrated with people who were healed of their disease. He celebrated with people around tables where meals were enjoyed together. He celebrates with sinners and saints. Jesus celebrates with you and with me as we gather in community, and promises to celebrate with us when our time has come. With wonder and amazement, hope, expectation, and a little mother's intuition. We are called to focus on Jesus and heed those words that are spoken to our hearts. Do whatever he tells you to do. Amen.